Texas, 1944. The sun over the plains didn't care who had won the war. It burned down on everything. The barbed wire, the wooden towers, the whitewashed barracks that shimmered in the heat. Inside the fences of Camp Hearne, a group of German women stood in silence, their faces pale under the hard light. They were prisoners of war, shipped halfway across the world from a collapsing Europe to the open land of Texas. Most of them had been secretaries, medics, or clerks for the German army. They were not soldiers, but in that summer, it hardly mattered. To them, Texas meant punishment, a word whispered in fear during the final months of the war. Back home, propaganda had painted America as a brutal land. Every morning, that smell drifted from the camp kitchen, fresh loaves baked by American cooks. The women watched in disbelief as guards carried food to the mess hall, laughing, talking, tipping their hats to each other. No one shouted. No dogs barked. No orders barked in anger. The guards wore uniforms, yes, but under their caps were tanned faces that looked more like farmers than soldiers. A few even had spurs on their boots. Cowboys, the women whispered. Real cowboys. Among the prisoners was 23-year-old Lieselot Bauer from Munich. Before the war, she had worked for the Luftwaffe as a file clerk. Her father was a teacher. Her brother had died on the Eastern Front. She had believed everything the radio told her, that America was a greedy empire, a place without honor. Now, standing in the Texas heat, that story no longer made sense. The guards said please. They said thank you. It was confusing in a way that felt dangerous. The journey that brought her here had taken weeks. After her capture in Italy, she was loaded onto a ship across the Atlantic, a Liberty vessel built in an American factory. The crew had treated the prisoners better than she expected. They gave out blankets, bandaged wounds, even shared cigarettes on calm nights. One sailor had handed her a mug of coffee and said, "No sugar, but it'll keep you warm." She hadn't known how to answer. Now, in Texas, she stood on soil that seemed too wide to hate anyone for long. The camp commander, Major William R. Walker, ran things with quiet discipline. He quoted the Geneva Convention more than once a day and told his men, "If we treat them like beasts, we'll raise beasts. If we treat them like people, we'll raise people." The logic was practical. Calmer prisoners meant fewer guards, but the effect went deeper than he ever intended. The women were given clean uniforms, real beds, and 3 full meals a day. Some worked in sewing rooms, repairing U.S. uniforms. Others tended vegetable plots near the stables. They were even paid a few cents for their labor, money they could use at the camp canteen to buy soap, postcards, or Coca-Cola. At first, none of them believed it. They whispered that the food was a trick, that the kindness would vanish. But days passed and no cruelty came. The barbed wire was still there. Yet it no longer felt like the whole world. In her small notebook, Lieselot wrote, "We were told America was cruel. Instead, it is calm. Too calm. Maybe that's more dangerous." She didn't know that beyond those fences, the men guarding her had grown up herding cattle, not marching in ranks. Men who measured strength by fairness, not fear. Soon, those two worlds, the German prisoners and the Texas Cowboys, would collide in a way no one could have predicted. And when it happened, the entire camp would stop breathing. At Camp Hearne, life settled into a rhythm that felt almost unreal. Each morning began with the clanging of a bell and the smell of coffee strong enough to wake the whole prairie. The German women lined up for roll call, their khaki uniforms clean but plain. By 7 o'clock, they were already working, some in the sewing rooms repairing uniforms, others outside tending vegetables under the watchful eyes of guards who leaned casually against fence posts. But those guards were not what the women had expected. Most weren't hardened soldiers. They were farmhands, cowboys, and mechanics pulled from small Texas towns. They wore sun-bleached shirts, spoke in soft drawls, and treated their duties more like ranch work than warfare. To them, these women weren't enemies. They were workers, people who needed to be managed, but not broken. The man who set that tone was Major William R. Walker, a career officer with the posture of a drill sergeant and the calm of a school teacher. He believed order didn't require cruelty. His rule was simple: follow the Geneva Convention to the letter. No shouting, no punishment without cause, no insults. If we treat them with dignity, he told his men, they'll return it. At first, the women didn't trust any of it. They'd been warned by Nazi officers that American kindness was only bait, that their captors would humiliate them when the cameras were gone. But no cameras came. The food stayed good. The guards stayed polite. Even the camp doctor, an army medic from Houston, treated them like patients, not prisoners. When the Red Cross visited Camp Hearne that autumn, their report stunned European officials. The women were healthy. They were allowed to write letters home. They received pay for their work. One official noted, "The camp operates more like a disciplined community than a prison." For the Texans, that wasn't strange. It was how they lived. The wide land didn't tolerate cruelty for long. It demanded cooperation. When equipment broke, everyone pitched in. When the weather turned, they looked out for each other. The same logic spread through the camp like sunlight. Lisa Lott noticed it most during her shifts near the stables. The air there smelled of hay and leather, not gun oil. The horses were kept in clean stalls, brushed daily by the same cowboys who guarded the camp gates. Sometimes they whistled as they worked, old frontier tunes that carried across the yard. It was the first music Lisa Lott had heard in months that didn't come from a marching band or a war film. One afternoon, while mending saddle straps, she began sketching. Her pencil moved quickly, capturing the curve of a horse's neck, the tension in its muscles, the tilt of its head. It was a habit she'd carried from home, drawing when words felt dangerous. She thought no one noticed until a shadow fell across her page. "Danke," she whispered automatically. He nodded, catching the meaning. "Means thank you, right?" She hesitated, then nodded. He pointed toward the open field beyond the barbed wire. "We run 'em after supper. You should watch sometime. They don't even know they're the lucky ones." Before she could reply, he tipped his hat and walked off. That night, the barracks buzzed with quiet whispers. The women asked what he had said, what he had wanted. Lisa Lott told them the truth, nothing more than a few words. But something about his tone, his calmness, stayed with her. The next evening, when the sun fell low and the sky turned orange, she stood by the fence. Beyond it, the cowboys rode their horses across the field, their silhouettes framed by dust and light. It looked nothing like war. For the first time since her capture, Lisa Lott felt something she couldn't name. Curiosity, maybe even peace. And somewhere between the sound of hooves and the smell of hay, she began to realize that this strange Texas camp was more than a prison. By autumn, the rhythm of Camp Hearne had become something almost peaceful. The war felt far away. The women worked, the guards rode patrol on horseback, and the Texas sun painted everything in shades of gold and dust. The fences still stood, but they no longer felt like walls. Every morning, Lisa Lott and a handful of others mended leather tack for the camp's horses. The guards often lingered nearby, offering quiet jokes or a cup of coffee. One of them, Tom Baker, the same man who had noticed her sketches, sometimes stopped to talk about ranch work, the weather, or his horse named Whiskey. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, His tone was steady and kind. To the women, it was strange. In Germany, soldiers shouted. Here, they asked questions. Tom once asked Lieselot, "You ever ride before?" She shook her head quickly. "Not really. Only saw soldiers' horses, not free ones." He nodded. "Well, there's a big difference. A free horse doesn't run because it's told to. It runs because it wants to." She didn't understand at first, but the idea stayed with her. Outside of work, the camp had its own small life. The Red Cross had donated books, and some of the prisoners started English lessons. Others grew vegetables or painted murals on the barracks walls. Guards would sometimes bring newspapers or radios, and at night, the sound of Glenn Miller or Texas Swing drifted through the camp. The German women began humming along, their voices soft at first, then louder. For the Texans, it was equally strange. These weren't the cold, fanatical enemies they'd seen in propaganda posters. They were tired, homesick young women, most barely older than the guards themselves. They work hard, one private wrote in a letter home, and they're polite. You forget for a while that there's a war on. Lieselot kept drawing. Her sketches of horses, the camp, even the guards, began to spread quietly among both prisoners and soldiers. Some guards slipped her extra pencils. Others asked her to draw their horses. The walls of the workshop slowly filled with her art, simple, clear, alive. The barrier between captor and captive began to blur in small, almost invisible ways. Guards tipped their hats when passing. Prisoners waved back. One woman, a nurse from Cologne, began teaching a young soldier how to say German phrases for fun. Guten Morgen, he'd call out proudly each morning, earning laughter from the women. Major Walker noticed all of this and didn't stop it. He knew that morale mattered more than regulations. They're still prisoners, he told his officers, but that doesn't mean they have to feel like animals. Still, whispers spread. A few of the older guards disapproved. Too friendly, one said. War's not over yet. But most of the younger men shrugged it off. The Texans had their own logic. Decency wasn't weakness. It was habit. Sundays were the one day when the camp relaxed completely. Work paused, and men and women alike found small pockets of freedom. The guards held rodeos near the stables to pass the time. Friendly contests of skill and pride. The prisoners gathered at the fences to watch, cheering or laughing when a rider lost his seat. It was on one of those Sundays that something shifted forever. The air was hot and still, the crowd restless with anticipation. Tom Baker was preparing to ride his horse Whiskey, known for his stubborn streak. As he tightened the saddle straps, he glanced toward the fence and saw Lieselot watching with her sketchbook in hand. She smiled nervously, then looked away. When his turn came, Tom rode out into the corral, dust swirling around him. Whiskey bucked hard. The crowd whooped, and laughter echoed across the yard. For a few moments, the war didn't exist. It was just a cowboy and a horse under a Texas sky. When the ride ended, someone from the crowd shouted, "Let the German ladies have a try." Everyone laughed, but in that laughter was something dangerous and new, a test of the line that divided them. Tom looked toward Lieselot again. She froze, not sure whether to smile or run. Then he said quietly, "Ever wonder what it feels like to ride one?" The camp went silent. Even the horses stopped shifting. In the next few moments, what happened would challenge everything both sides thought they knew about enemies, mercy, and what freedom could look like behind a fence. The afternoon sun hung heavy over Camp Hearne, turning the dust into a glowing haze. A crowd of guards and prisoners lined the fence of the corral. Laughter had faded into silence. All eyes were fixed on one man and one woman. Tom Baker, the cowboy guard, and Lieselot Bauer, the German prisoner, who stood frozen a few steps from the gate. Tom's horse, Whiskey, pawed the ground, restless. The air crackled with uncertainty. No one knew what was about to happen, least of all Lieselot. Her heart raced as Tom opened the small gate and walked toward her. "You ever been on a horse?" he asked quietly, his drawl easy but serious. She shook her head, barely breathing. "Come on," he said. "He don't bite." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few guards exchanged worried looks. The camp's rules were clear. No unnecessary contact with prisoners. But no one moved to stop him. Maybe it was the heat, or the calm way he carried himself, or maybe everyone just wanted to see what would happen next. Tom extended his hand. For a moment, Lieselot didn't move. Then, almost without thinking, she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle. In one smooth motion, he lifted her onto the saddle. The movement was so effortless, if for a second, she forgot to be afraid. And then, the world stopped. The corral went completely silent. The guards froze, the prisoners stared, and even the horses stood still. The Texas wind, always whispering through the grass, seemed to hold its breath. Lieselot sat stiffly, gripping the saddle horn, her eyes wide. She expected someone to shout, for the officer to storm in and drag her down. But nothing happened. Tom just smiled up at her. "Hold on tight," he said softly. "He's gentle once you get to know him." Whiskey took a slow step forward. Then another. The saddle creaked. The smell of leather and dust filled the air. The rhythm of the horse's gait was steady and calm, and for the first time in years, Lieselot felt a kind of movement that wasn't driven by orders or fear. She felt free. When they stopped, Tom looked up at her and said, "See? Told you he was kind." Her eyes welled up. She tried to speak, but no words came out. A single tear slipped down her cheek, leaving a clean trail through the dust on her face. Slowly, she climbed down. For a moment, their hands touched again. Tom tipped his hat. "Didn't mean no harm, ma'am. Just figured everyone deserves a little sunshine." The silence that followed was heavier than any speech. Behind the fence, a guard finally muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." But even he said it softly, as if afraid to break whatever spell had settled over the camp. Major Walker had been watching from his office porch. When his aide turned to ask if they should report the incident, Walker just exhaled and said, "So long as she didn't fall, I see no problem." Then he walked away. That night, Camp Hearne changed. Rumors spread through the barracks like wildfire. Some said it was a stunt, others called it madness, but most spoke of it as something sacred. "He lifted her like she mattered," one woman whispered, "like we weren't ghosts." The next morning, Tom was still there, drinking coffee, same hat, same easy grin. No one reprimanded him. No one dared. Something invisible had shifted, and everyone felt it. The prisoners worked with a new quiet energy that day. They stood a little taller. The guards were gentler, more thoughtful. It wasn't about the ride itself. It was about what it proved. That kindness once shown couldn't be undone. In her diary that night, Lieselot wrote, "For 10 seconds, I stopped being a prisoner. I was just a woman on a horse, and the world felt wide again." Across the camp, the chaplain wrote something similar in his logbook. A cowboy lifted an enemy onto his horse, and for a moment, the war stopped. Neither of them knew it yet, but that single act, simple, wordless, human, would outlive the war, the fences, and even the people who witnessed it. Because that afternoon, under the Texas sun, mercy had proved itself stronger than victory. Winter came soft and dry that year. The Texas sky turned pale, and frost clung to the fence lines around Camp Hearne. The war was still raging overseas, but inside the camp, it felt distant, like thunder from another world. The prisoners worked less now. Some read, some wrote letters, and every evening, Lieselot sat near the stables, sketching the horses she had learned to love. After that day in the corral, things inside the camp changed quietly, but completely. The guards still did their rounds, the prisoners still lined up for roll call, but the edge of fear was gone. The women smiled when the cowboys passed by. The men smiled back. Even the most hardened guard couldn't deny that something had softened. The story of the ride spread far beyond the fences. The Red Cross inspector mentioned it in his next report, a remarkable display of mutual respect. In nearby towns, locals repeated it in cafes and churches. Did you hear about the cowboy who put a German woman on his horse? Nobody knew the names, but the story traveled fast. In a time of violence, it sounded like a miracle. For Lieselot, it was more than a story. It was proof that kindness could exist in the middle of war. She began teaching English to the other women, sketching portraits for guards, and writing long letters home. In one letter, she told her mother, "They do not treat us like prisoners. They treat us like people who lost their way." Tom Baker never spoke much about that day. When asked, he would shrug and say, "Didn't seem right, keeping someone scared of sunlight." But people noticed he was different too. He still rode whiskey in the evenings, but now he often paused near the women's barracks, tipping his hat before riding off. Then, one May morning in 1945, the radio crackled in the mess hall. Everyone, guards and prisoners alike, crowded around as a calm American voice announced, "Germany has surrendered unconditionally." No one cheered, no one moved. The words hung in the air like dust in sunlight. Lieselot felt her knees weaken. Some women cried, others stood in silence, staring at the floor. The guards removed their hats. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint buzz of the radio. Later that day, the kitchen served extra food: biscuits, eggs, bacon, even Coca-Cola chilled in metal tubs. The guards and prisoners ate together for the first time. No ranks, no orders, just people sitting side by side. Tom brought Lieselot a plate. "Peace breakfast," he said simply. She smiled through tears. "It tastes like forgiveness." Someone turned on a radio, and Glenn Miller's "In the Mood" drifted through the mess hall. A few women hummed softly, and one guard joined in. The sound of laughter returned, quiet, cautious, real. That night, Lieselot wrote in her diary, "We thought defeat would taste like humiliation. Instead, it tastes like bacon and coffee." Weeks later, the trucks arrived to take the prisoners east toward the ship's home. Each woman carried a small suitcase and one personal item. Lieselot held Tom's old cowboy hat, the brim still faintly smelling of dust and smoke. At the gate, Tom waited, hatless for the first time. "Guess this is goodbye," he said. "For now," she answered. "You taught me more than English, Tom. You taught me what freedom feels like." He smiled, embarrassed. Never thought a cowboy would teach a German about freedom. The trucks started their engines. Lieselot climbed aboard and waved until the camp disappeared behind a haze of dust and sunlight. Months later, she returned to a ruined Germany. Her home was gone, her family scattered. But in the middle of that wreckage, she carried something the war couldn't destroy: a small piece of Texas. Years later, a letter arrived at Tom Baker's ranch. It came from Bremen, written in careful English. Inside was a photograph of a woman standing beside a rebuilt farmhouse, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. On the back were 4 words: still riding, still free. Tom never wrote back. He didn't need to. He framed the photo and hung it above his desk, where it stayed for the rest of his life. Beneath it, in his own rough handwriting, he wrote, "The day we stopped being enemies." And that's how the war ended for them. Not with victory, not with surrender, but with a horse, a smile, and a moment when the world remembered what being human really meant.